The October air carried the scent of burning leaves and teenage dreams as Madison Creek High School buzzed with Friday night energy. Students poured from the brick building toward the football field, their voices mixing with the distant sound of the marching band warming up. Among them walked 17-year-old Sarah Chun, her woodland camouflage uniform standing out like a sore thumb against the sea of blue jeans and team jerseys. Sarah kept her eyes forward, clutching her backpack tighter as she heard the familiar whispers start up behind her. She had grown used to the stares and comments since joining the junior RDC program 6 months ago, but they still stung every single time. "Look at G.I. Jane," snickered Tyler Morrison, the star quarterback whose Letterman jacket seemed permanently attached to his broad shoulders. His girlfriend, Jessica, giggled, covering her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers, as if that would somehow soften the cruelty of their laughter. "Why does she even wear that thing?" Jessica whispered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "It's not like she's actually in the army or anything. She's just playing dress-up." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she continued walking. If only they knew the truth about why she wore this uniform with such pride, why every thread and every patch meant more to her than any designer outfit ever could. But she had learned long ago that trying to explain herself to people like Tyler and Jessica was like trying to teach calculus to a goldfish. The Madison Creek Warriors were playing their biggest rivals tonight, the Riverside Ravens, and the entire town seemed to have turned out for the game. Cars lined every street for blocks around the school, and the local diner had put up a banner wishing the team good luck. This was the kind of small town where high school football wasn't just a game, it was religion, and the players weren't just athletes, they were gods. Sarah made her way to the bleachers, scanning for an empty spot where she might sit in peace. The student section was packed with her classmates, all wearing the school colors of blue and gold, waving pom-poms and holding signs with clever sayings about crushing the competition. She spotted an empty space near the top corner and began climbing the metal steps, each clang echoing under her combat boots. As she settled onto the cold aluminum bench, Sarah pulled her phone from her cargo pocket and checked the time. 7:15 p.m. The game would start in 15 minutes, but she wasn't really here for the football. She was here because she had nowhere else to go on a Friday night, and home felt even lonelier than sitting surrounded by people who barely acknowledged her existence. "Hey, Army girl," called out Brad Stevens, one of Tyler's teammates who was sitting on the bench tonight due to a shoulder injury. He was 3 rows down with a group of his friends, his arm in a sling, but his mouth working just fine. "You planning to invade somebody after the game?" His friends erupted in laughter, and several other students turned to see what was so funny. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to stare straight ahead at the field where the teams were running their final warm-up drills. "Leave her alone, Brad," said a voice Sarah recognized as belonging to Marcus Williams, one of the few students who had ever been kind to her. Marcus was a junior like herself, but he played on the varsity team despite being younger than most of his teammates. He was also one of the only black students at Madison Creek High, so he understood something about feeling different. "Oh, come on, Marcus," Brad replied with a grin that showed his perfect white teeth. "I'm just having a little fun. Besides, don't you think it's weird how she wears that outfit everywhere? Like, we get it, you want attention, but there are easier ways to get noticed." "Maybe she wears it because she earned the right to," Marcus shot back, his voice carrying an edge that made Brad's smile falter slightly. Sarah felt a flutter of gratitude toward Marcus, but she also felt the familiar twist in her stomach that came whenever she became the center of attention, even positive attention. She just wanted to disappear, to blend into the bleachers until the game was over, and she could slip away unnoticed. Down on the field, the players were taking their positions for the opening kickoff. The crowd was getting louder, and the cheerleaders were leading chants that echoed off the surrounding buildings. The Friday night lights blazed down on the perfectly manicured grass, creating an almost magical atmosphere that Sarah had to admit was pretty impressive, even if she felt like an outsider looking in. Coach Peterson blew his whistle, and the teams lined up facing each other like 2 armies preparing for battle. Sarah found herself thinking about real battles, real wars, and real heroes who had fought and died wearing uniforms not so different from the ones she wore now. These boys playing their game had no idea what real courage looked like, what real sacrifice meant. The kicker approached the ball, and the crowd held its breath. The kick sailed through the air as players charged down the field, their cleats tearing up chunks of grass as they collided with bone-crushing force. The crowd erupted as the Warriors' return man broke free for a decent runback, setting up good field position for the home team's first drive. As the offensive unit took the field, Sarah noticed Tyler Morrison jogging out to the huddle, his helmet gleaming under the lights. He was undeniably talented with a rocket arm and the kind of natural leadership that made other players want to follow him. But talent and leadership on a football field didn't automatically make someone a good person, and Tyler had proven that fact repeatedly in his treatment of anyone he considered beneath his social status. The first quarter flew by, with both teams trading possessions and feeling each other out. Madison Creek managed to score first on a beautiful touchdown pass from Tyler to his favorite receiver, Jake Martinez, who somehow managed to haul in the ball despite being double covered in the end zone. The crowd went wild, and Sarah found herself getting caught up in the excitement despite her best efforts to remain detached. During a timeout, she noticed several parents pointing in her direction and whispering among themselves. She wondered if they were talking about her uniform, or maybe they had heard about the incident last month when she had gotten into an argument with Mrs. Henderson, the chemistry teacher, about women in combat roles. That had been awkward, especially since Mrs. Henderson's son had been killed in Afghanistan 3 years earlier. As the second quarter began, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down and saw it was from her older brother Danny, who was currently stationed at Fort Campbell in Kentucky with the 101st Airborne Division. Her heart immediately jumped. Danny rarely texted during the week, much less on a Friday night. "Hey sis," the message read. "Hope you're doing okay tonight. Remember what we talked about. Stay strong, and don't let the idiots get you down. You're tougher than all of them combined, and one day they'll understand that. Love you." Sarah smiled for the first time all evening, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the jacket she wore over her uniform. Danny always seemed to know exactly when she needed to hear from him, even though he was hundreds of miles away. He had been her rock ever since their father had deployed to Afghanistan when Sarah was 15, and he continued to be her biggest supporter even after joining the Army himself, right after graduation. She was typing back a response when she heard the distinctive sound that made her blood run cold. The distant thump, thump, thump of helicopter rotors. At first, she thought she might be imagining it, but the sound grew steadily louder, cutting through the noise of the crowd and the announcer's voice booming over the public address system. Other people were starting to notice it too. Heads turned skyward, searching the darkness beyond the reach of the stadium lights. The sound was definitely getting closer, and it was definitely military. Sarah would know that sound anywhere. She had grown up around military bases, had heard that particular rhythm countless times during her childhood when her father was still stationed stateside. "What the heck is that?" someone called out from a few rows down. The helicopter was close enough now that the sound was impossible to ignore. Players on the field were looking up, shielding their eyes against the bright lights as they tried to spot the aircraft. The coaches were looking confused, and even the referees seemed unsure of what to do. Then Sarah saw it, a dark shape moving across the star-filled sky, its navigation lights blinking red and green as it approached the stadium. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the distinctive silhouette of a Black Hawk helicopter, its rotors beating the air with mechanical precision. The crowd was getting restless now, with people standing up and pointing, their voices rising in excitement and confusion. Some were pulling out their phones to record whatever was about to happen. The players had stopped their huddle and were staring up at the approaching aircraft, their game temporarily forgotten. "Is that thing gonna land here?" someone shouted over the growing noise. Sarah's heart was pounding now, not from fear, but from a growing suspicion about what was happening. She thought about Danny's text message, about the timing of everything, and a wild hope began to bloom in her chest. But she didn't dare let herself believe it, not yet. The helicopter was directly overhead now, its powerful rotors creating a downdraft that sent programs and empty cups swirling through the air. The sound was deafening, and several small children in the stands started crying from the noise and confusion. The pilots were circling the stadium, obviously looking for somewhere to land. Then, to everyone's amazement, the Black Hawk began descending toward the football field itself. The players scattered like leaves in a hurricane, running for the sidelines as the massive aircraft settled onto the 50-yard line with surprising grace. The rotor wash flattened the yard line markings and sent the cheerleaders running for cover, their pom-poms forgotten in their haste to get away from the powerful winds. As the rotors wound down and the dust began to settle, an eerie quiet fell over the stadium. 8,000 people sat in stunned silence, watching the sleek military helicopter sitting in the middle of their high school football field like something out of a movie. The side door of the Black Hawk slid open, and a figure in full military dress uniform stepped out onto the grass. Sarah's world stopped spinning as she watched the uniformed figure step out of the Black Hawk helicopter. Even from her perch high in the bleachers, even in the strange interplay of stadium lights and rotor wash shadows, she would recognize that walk anywhere. That confident stride, the way he held his shoulders, the precise military bearing that had been drilled into him through years of service. It was her father. Colonel David Chun stood on the 50-yard line in his army dress blue uniform, the ribbons on his chest catching the stadium lights as he looked up into the stands. His eyes scanned the crowd methodically, the same way he had taught Sarah to observe her surroundings during their weekend camping trips when she was younger. He was searching for something or someone. The stadium remained locked in absolute silence, 8,000 people holding their collective breath as they tried to process what they were witnessing. This kind of thing simply didn't happen in Madison Creek, Missouri. Military helicopters didn't land on high school football fields during the homecoming game. Decorated Army colonels didn't emerge from aircraft like movie heroes to interrupt teenage Friday night rituals. Sarah's hands were shaking now, her phone forgotten in her lap as emotions crashed over her like ocean waves. She hadn't seen her father in 14 months, not since his last leave before deploying to his second tour in Afghanistan. They had talked on video calls when possible, exchanged messages when the time zones aligned, but the physical distance had created an ache in her chest that never quite went away. Down on the field, Colonel Chun began walking toward the home team sideline, where Coach Peterson stood with his mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for air. The coach was a 20-year veteran of high school athletics, a man who had seen everything from championship celebrations to heartbreaking losses, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Chun called out, his voice carrying clearly across the silent stadium without need for a microphone. Years of commanding troops had given him the ability to project his voice with authority that demanded attention. "I apologize for interrupting your football game. I'm looking for my daughter, Sarah Chun." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her legs feel suddenly weak. Around her, she could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes beginning to search the crowd, looking for this mysterious daughter whose father had just landed a military helicopter on their football field. She wanted to stand up, wanted to call out to him, but her body seemed frozen in place. Part of her couldn't quite believe this was really happening, that her father was really here, that this wasn't some elaborate dream brought on by stress and loneliness. "Sarah," Colonel Chun continued, his voice softer now, but still carrying to every corner of the stadium, "I know you're here somewhere, sweetheart. Could you come down to the field, please?" The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Sarah could feel her classmates looking around, some of them beginning to put together the pieces. She caught sight of Tyler Morrison standing on the sideline, his helmet tucked under his arm, his face wearing an expression she had never seen before, something that might have been respect or at least uncertainty. Finally, Marcus Williams spotted her in the upper bleachers and pointed. "There," he called out. "There she is." All eyes turned towards Sarah, and she felt herself becoming the center of attention in a way she had never experienced before. This wasn't the negative attention that came with being different or wearing a uniform that others didn't understand. This was something else entirely. Slowly, Sarah stood up from her seat. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, but she forced herself to move. She began making her way down the metal bleacher steps, each footfall echoing in the supernatural quiet that had settled over the stadium. As she walked, whispered conversations began breaking out around her. She caught fragments of excited voices, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. "That's her father?" Someone whispered in amazement. "How did he know she was here?" wondered another voice. "Is he really a colonel?" asked a third person, the disbelief clear in their tone. Sarah kept her eyes focused on her father, afraid that if she looked away, he might disappear like a mirage. He was watching her approach with the kind of smile she remembered from her childhood, the one that had always made her feel like the most important person in the world. When she reached the chain-link fence that separated the stands from the field, her father was there waiting for her. Up close, she could see that he looked tired. There were new lines around his eyes, and his hair had more gray than she remembered, but his smile was exactly the same. "Hi, sweetheart," he said simply, and the sound of his voice speaking directly to her instead of through a computer screen or phone connection made tears spring to her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "What are you doing here? How are you here?" Colonel Chun reached through the fence and took her hands in his. His uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and decoration in perfect order, but Sarah could see the calluses on his fingers from handling weapons and equipment in the harsh Afghan desert. "Emergency leave," he explained, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I got word that my daughter was having some trouble at school, and I decided it was time to come home and remind everyone exactly who she is." The crowd was pressing closer now, trying to hear every word of this unprecedented conversation. Sarah was vaguely aware of phones being held up, recording this moment for posterity, but she didn't care. Her father was here, and nothing else mattered. "But the helicopter," she said, still trying to process everything that was happening. "How did you get permission to land here?" Colonel Chin grinned, and she saw the flash of the man who had taught her to throw a curveball and helped her build a treehouse in their backyard before the demands of military service had pulled him away. "Sometimes being a colonel has its privileges," he said with a wink, "especially when you're flying with some old friends from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment who owe you a few favors." He gestured toward the Black Hawk, where Sarah could now see two pilots in the cockpit, both giving her small waves. These weren't just any Army aviators. The 160th SOAR were the legendary Night Stalkers, the elite helicopter pilots who flew the most dangerous missions in the world. "Besides," her father continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I heard there were some people here who needed to understand something important about the uniform my daughter wears." Sarah felt her cheeks burning again, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. Her father somehow knew about the teasing, about the comments, and the cruel jokes. She wondered how much Danny had told him during their communications. Colonel Chun turned to address the crowd, his command presence immediately evident as conversations died down and people leaned forward to listen. "I want everyone here to understand something," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the stadium. "My daughter Sarah wears that uniform because she's earned a right to wear it. She's completed the same basic training requirements that every soldier in the United States Army completes. She can field strip an M16 rifle blindfolded. She can navigate using map and compass, and she can provide first aid that could save your life." The crowd was hanging on every word now. Even the football players had gathered closer to listen, their game temporarily forgotten in the face of this real-world drama unfolding before them. More importantly, Colonel Chun continued, "She wears that uniform because she understands something that many people her age don't. That freedom isn't free, that service to something greater than yourself is an honor, not a burden, and that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with character and determination." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face now, overwhelmed by pride and love and the knowledge that her father had traveled thousands of miles just to stand up for her in front of the people who had made her feel small and unwanted. But he wasn't finished. Colonel Chin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small blue box that Sarah recognized immediately. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what he was about to do. "Sarah," he said, opening the box to reveal the gleaming silver medal inside. "By order of the Department of the Army, and in recognition of your outstanding performance in the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps program, including your leadership during the state-level competition last spring, where your team placed second in the nation, I'm authorized to present you with the JROTC Medal for Academic Excellence." The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs of surprise. Sarah's own mouth fell open. She had no idea that her performance at the state competition had earned her any kind of official recognition. They had worked so hard preparing for that competition, studying military history and tactics, practicing drill movements until they could perform them flawlessly, learning map reading and survival skills that most adults would never master. Furthermore, her father continued, raising his voice to be heard over the excited conversations breaking out around them. "I'm also authorized to inform you that based on your academic performance, your leadership abilities, and your commitment to service, you have been offered a full 4-year ROTC scholarship to attend West Point Military Academy upon graduation from high school." The stadium exploded into noise. Some people were cheering, others were talking excitedly among themselves, and Sarah could see several of her classmates looking at her with expressions of shock and newfound respect. Tyler Morrison was staring at her with his mouth hanging open, apparently trying to reconcile this new information with his preconceived notions about the quiet girl in Camouflage. But Sarah barely heard the crowd's reaction. Her entire world had narrowed to focus on her father and the impossible words he had just spoken. West Point, the most prestigious military academy in the United States, the institution that had produced presidents and generals and heroes. They wanted her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise around them. "Are you serious? Is this really happening?" Colonel Chun smiled and reached through the fence to cup her face in his hands. "Dead serious, sweetheart. They don't offer West Point scholarships to just anyone. You've earned this through years of hard work, dedication, and the kind of character that can't be taught in any classroom." He pinned the medal to her uniform jacket with practiced precision, the silver catching the stadium lights as it found its place among the other ribbons and decorations she had earned through her JROTC activities. Sarah looked down at it, still trying to process everything that was happening. Around them, the crowd had begun to quiet down as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just a father surprising his daughter. This was a recognition ceremony for achievements that none of them had even known about. The weight of the medal on Sarah's chest felt like both an honor and a responsibility as her father stepped back to address the crowd once more. The stadium had settled into an expectant hush, 8,000 people hanging on every word from this decorated Army colonel who had literally dropped out of the sky to transform their understanding of the quiet girl they had dismissed. "I know some of you might be wondering how my daughter earned recognition that many of you weren't aware of," Colonel Chun said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat. "So let me tell you about what happened in Jefferson City last spring at the state JROTC competition." Sarah felt her cheeks flush as hundreds of eyes focused on her again, but this time the attention felt different. There was curiosity now instead of mockery, respect beginning to replace the casual cruelty she had endured for months. 24 schools from across Missouri sent their best cadets to compete in events testing military knowledge, physical fitness, leadership skills, and academic excellence, her father continued. Sarah's team from Madison Creek High School was competing against schools with programs that had been established for decades, some with funding and resources that our small-town program could only dream of. Coach Peterson, who had been standing nearby in stunned silence, spoke up for the first time. "I remember when they left for that competition," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet field. "They took a school bus and packed their own lunches because the district didn't have the budget for a big trip." Several parents in the crowd nodded knowingly. The struggles of a small school district were familiar to everyone in Madison Creek, where fundraisers and bake sales were often the difference between having programs and going without. Colonel Chin smiled proudly as he continued his daughter's story. Despite being the smallest school in their division and having the newest JROTC program, Sarah's team dominated the academic portions of the competition. They placed first in military history, first in map reading and navigation, and first in the written examination on leadership principles. The crowd was murmuring now, impressed despite themselves. These weren't activities that most teenagers would find easy or enjoyable, but Sarah and her teammates had apparently excelled at them. But The real test came during the leadership challenge, her father went on, his voice taking on a note of pride that made Sarah's heart swell. Each team was given a complex scenario involving a humanitarian crisis in a foreign country. They had to develop a complete operational plan, assign roles and responsibilities, and present their solution to a panel of active duty officers and senior NCOs. Tyler Morrison, who was still standing on the sideline with his teammates, found himself leaning forward to hear better. Leadership was something he prided himself on, at least on the football field, but what Colonel Chun was describing sounded far more complex than calling plays in a huddle. Sarah was selected as her team's leader for this exercise. Colonel Chun continued, and Sarah saw several of her classmates exchange surprised glances. Many of them had never heard her speak more than a few words in class, much less imagined her taking charge of a complicated military simulation. The scenario involved coordinating relief supplies for earthquake victims while dealing with hostile forces, limited transportation, and conflicting political interests. Teams had 4 hours to develop their plan and 30 minutes to present it. Most teams struggled with the complexity of the problem. He paused, scanning the crowd to make sure he had everyone's attention. Even the football players who had been so eager to get back to their game were listening intently now. Sarah's team didn't just solve the problem, he said with obvious pride. They identified potential issues that the scenario designers hadn't even considered. They developed contingency plans for equipment failures, alternative supply routes in case primary roads were blocked, and diplomatic protocols for working with local officials. Their presentation was so impressive that 2 of the evaluating officers asked for copies to use in their own training programs. The silence that followed was different from the stunned quiet that had greeted the helicopter's arrival. This was the silence of people reassessing everything they thought they knew about someone. Marcus Williams, who had defended Sarah earlier in the evening, felt a surge of vindication. He had known there was something special about the quiet girl who wore her uniform with such obvious pride, but even he hadn't imagined anything like this. That level of performance doesn't happen by accident, Colonel Chun continued. It's the result of studying military history until you understand not just what happened, but why it happened. It's learning to think strategically, to consider not just the immediate problem, but all the ways that problem connects to larger issues. It's developing the discipline to prepare thoroughly for every challenge. Principal Martinez, who had come down from the school building when reports reached him about a helicopter landing on his football field, was beginning to understand that he had been seriously underestimating one of his students. The JROTC program at Madison Creek was relatively new, and he realized he hadn't been paying enough attention to what the cadets were actually accomplishing. But Sarah's achievements go beyond academic competitions, her father said, reaching into another pocket and pulling out a thick folder. Since joining the JROTC program, she has completed advanced courses in first aid and emergency response. She's certified in CPR and basic life support. She's completed wilderness survival training and can read topographical maps better than most Eagle Scouts. The folder in his hands contains certificates and documentation that few people in the crowd would have imagined a teenager could earn. These weren't participation trophies or feel-good awards. These were serious certifications that required real knowledge and practical skills. She's also volunteered over 200 hours of community service in the past year, Colonel Chun continued, consulting his folder. She's helped at the food bank, assisted at the senior center, and participated in 3 disaster relief exercises with the county emergency management office. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the local food bank, was in the crowd and found herself nodding in recognition. She remembered the quiet young woman in the military uniform who showed up every Saturday morning, willing to do whatever needed to be done without complaint. Sarah never asked for recognition or credit. She just worked. Last month, her father said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, Sarah used her first aid training to help save a man's life when he collapsed from a heart attack in the grocery store parking lot. While other people were panicking or calling for help, she immediately began CPR and continued until the paramedics arrived. The doctors said her quick action was the difference between life and death. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Several people turned to look at Harold Morrison, Tyler's grandfather, who was sitting in the senior section with a small bandage still visible on his forehead. The old man's face was pale as he realized what Colonel Chun was describing. "Sarah," Harold called out in a shaky voice, "was that you who helped me?" Sarah nodded, feeling embarrassed by the attention, but unable to deny what had happened. She had been leaving the grocery store when she saw the elderly man collapse next to his car. Her JROTC training had kicked in automatically, and she had done what needed to be done without thinking about recognition or reward. Tyler Morrison was staring at his grandfather, then at Sarah, his face cycling through a range of emotions. The girl he had been mocking for months had potentially saved his grandfather's life. The weight of that realization was crushing. "All of this," Colonel Chun said, gesturing toward his daughter, "is why the United States Military Academy wants Sarah to be part of their next class of cadets." West Point doesn't just look for good grades or test scores. They look for character, leadership potential, and a commitment to service that goes beyond personal ambition. The crowd was completely quiet now, absorbing the magnitude of what they had just learned. Many of these people had known Sarah for years, had seen her in classes and in the hallways, but they had never really seen her at all. "The scholarship she's been offered," her father continued, "is worth over $400,000 and includes not just tuition and room and board, but also a guarantee of a career as an officer in the United States Army. Upon graduation, she'll be commissioned as a second lieutenant and will have the opportunity to serve her country in whatever capacity her talents and interests dictate." Principal Martinez was quickly doing the math in his head. A full scholarship to West Point was more valuable than anything any other student in the school's history had ever achieved. This was the kind of accomplishment that would put Madison Creek High School on the map, the kind of success story that school administrators dreamed about. But perhaps most importantly, Colonel Chun said, his voice softening as he looked at his daughter, "Sarah has learned something that many adults never master. She's learned that real strength comes from serving something bigger than yourself. That real courage isn't about being fearless, but about doing what's right even when you are afraid." He reached through the fence again and took Sarah's hands in his. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart, not just for these achievements, but for who you've become in spite of the challenges you've faced. You've shown more maturity and character at 17 than many people show in their entire lives." Sarah felt the tears flowing freely now, not from sadness or embarrassment, but from overwhelming gratitude and love. Her father had not just surprised her with his presence. He had publicly validated everything she had worked for, everything she believed in, everything that made her who she was. Around them, the crowd was beginning to process not just what they had learned about Sarah, but what they had learned about themselves. Many of the students who had mocked her uniform were beginning to understand that they had been laughing at something they didn't comprehend, dismissing achievements they couldn't match. Coach Peterson stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "Colonel Chun," he said, "I wonder if I could ask Sarah something." Sarah's father nodded, and the coach turned to address her directly. "Sarah, I know you're not on our football team, obviously, but what you've accomplished takes the kind of discipline and teamwork that I try to teach my players. Would you be willing to come talk to them sometime about leadership and mental toughness?" The request sent another wave of surprise through the crowd. Coach Peterson was asking the girl who had been mocked by his players to come teach them about the very qualities he valued most. Before Sarah could respond, Marcus Williams spoke up from the sideline. "Coach, if Sarah's willing to do that, I think the whole team would benefit from hearing what she has to say." Several other players nodded in agreement, and Sarah could see a fundamental shift happening in real time. The social dynamics that had governed this school for years were being rewritten in the span of a few minutes. Tyler Morrison stood frozen on the sideline, his helmet hanging forgotten in his hands as the full weight of the evening's revelations crashed over him. The girl he had spent months tormenting with casual cruelty had just been revealed as someone whose accomplishments dwarfed anything he had achieved on the football field. Worse yet, she had potentially saved his grandfather's life while he had been calling her names and treating her like she was beneath his notice. The quarterback who had always prided himself on being a leader was beginning to understand that he had never encountered real leadership until tonight. Everything he thought he knew about strength, about honor, about what it meant to be special was crumbling around him as he watched Sarah Chun stand quietly beside her father, accepting praise with the same humble dignity she had shown while enduring months of mockery. Colonel Chun seemed to sense the shift in the crowd's mood, the way years of military experience had taught him to read the emotional temperature of any group. He could see teenagers processing new information that challenged their assumptions, adults recognizing their own failures of perception, and the beginnings of something that might eventually become respect where there had once been ignorance. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, addressing the stadium at large. "And I don't want anyone to feel bad about not knowing these things about Sarah. She's never been one to talk about her accomplishments or seek attention for her achievements. That's part of what makes her special. She does the work because it needs to be done, not because she wants recognition for it." Principal Martinez stepped forward, his mind racing as he began to understand the public relations opportunity that had literally fallen from the sky onto his football field. "Colonel Chun, if I may," he said, "I think our entire community would benefit from learning more about what Sarah and our other JROTC students have been accomplishing. Perhaps we could arrange a proper ceremony to honor their achievements." The suggestion sparked immediate interest among the parents in the crowd. Madison Creek was a community that took pride in its young people's successes, and they were beginning to realize they had been overlooking some significant accomplishments right under their noses. "That's very kind," Colonel Chin replied, "but I think Sarah would prefer to let her actions speak for themselves. She's not looking for parades or special recognition. She's just trying to become the best version of herself, and she's using military values as her guide." He turned back to his daughter, his expression softening with paternal love and pride. "Which brings me to the real reason I'm here tonight. Sarah, I know the past few months have been difficult. I know there have been times when you've felt alone, when a uniform you wear with such pride has made you a target for people who don't understand what it represents." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her father's words were bringing back all the painful moments, the snide comments in the hallways, the laughter that followed her wherever she went, the feeling of being constantly judged for choices that others couldn't comprehend. "But I want you to know," her father continued, his voice strong enough to carry to every corner of the stadium, "that what you've endured here has made you stronger than any training exercise ever could. Learning to stand firm in your convictions when others doubt you, maintaining your integrity when it would be easier to compromise, treating people with respect even when they don't show you the same courtesy. These are the qualities that make great leaders." The crowd was listening intently now, many of them beginning to understand that they were witnessing something more profound than a simple family reunion. This was a master class in character, delivered by a man who had spent his career understanding what it meant to serve something greater than yourself. "The cadets at West Point will learn about military history and tactics and leadership theory," Colonel Chin said. "But you've learned something even more valuable. You've learned what it feels like to be different, to be misunderstood, to have your worth questioned by people who don't know you. That experience will make you a better leader than any textbook ever could." Tyler Morrison felt each word like a physical blow. He thought about all the times he had made casual comments about Sarah's uniform, all the jokes he had made at her expense, all the opportunities he had missed to actually get to know the person behind the camouflage. He had been so focused on maintaining his position at the top of the social hierarchy that he had never stopped to consider who he might be stepping on along the way. Jessica, who had been standing beside Tyler throughout the ceremony, was having her own moment of reckoning. She had always prided herself on being popular, on having the right clothes, and saying the right things to fit in with the crowd that mattered. But watching Sarah stand there with quiet dignity, surrounded by evidence of real accomplishments and genuine character, Jessica was beginning to question what actually mattered. "Sarah," her father said, "I want you to remember this moment. Not because of the medal or the scholarship, or even because I was able to be here to see it. Remember it because of how it feels to have your worth recognized, to have your achievements acknowledged, to know that the work you've put in has real meaning." He gestured toward the crowd around them, many of whom were still processing the dramatic shift in their understanding of the girl they thought they knew. "But more importantly, I want you to remember how you felt during all those times when that recognition wasn't there. Remember what it was like to do the right thing when no one was watching, to maintain your standards when others questioned them, to treat people with kindness even when they didn't return the favor." The wisdom in his words was not lost on the adults in the crowd, many of whom were beginning to reflect on their own behavior and the examples they had been setting for their children. Dr. Williams, who served as the school district superintendent and was Marcus's father, had been listening with growing concern about the climate his son and other students had been navigating. The idea that a student with Sarah's achievements had been enduring mockery and social isolation suggested serious failures in the school's culture. Colonel Chun, Dr. Williams called out, "Would it be possible for you to speak with our faculty and administration about creating a more supportive environment for all our students? I think we have some learning to do about recognizing and valuing different kinds of excellence." The request sparked nods of agreement throughout the crowd. Parents who had been focused on football victories and homecoming court elections were beginning to understand that there were other kinds of success worth celebrating. "I'd be honored to do that," Colonel Chin replied. "But I think the real teachers are already here in your community. Sarah and the other JROTC cadets have been demonstrating military values every day. Values like integrity, respect, selfless service, and personal courage. Maybe it's time for the rest of us to start paying attention to what they're teaching." The simplicity and truth of his statement resonated powerfully with the crowd. Many of these adults had served in the military themselves or had family members who had served. They understood these values in theory, but they were being challenged to consider how well they were living them in practice. Sarah finally found her voice, speaking quietly but clearly in the relative hush that had settled over the stadium. "Dad, thank you for coming. Thank you for believing in me and for helping everyone understand. But I want people to know that I didn't do any of this for recognition or awards." Her words carried a maturity that surprised many of her classmates, who were used to teenagers who seemed motivated primarily by social media likes and peer approval. "I wear this uniform because it represents values I believe in," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I study military history because I want to understand the sacrifices that people have made for our freedom. I train for leadership roles because I want to be someone that others can depend on when things get difficult." The authenticity in her words was unmistakable. This wasn't a rehearsed speech or an attempt to impress anyone. This was simply a young woman explaining her choices and her motivations with the kind of clarity that comes from genuine conviction. "I know some of you have had questions about why I dress this way or why I spend my free time on military activities instead of things that might seem more normal for someone my age," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the crowd, but avoiding direct eye contact with those who have been hardest on her. "I hope tonight helped answer some of those questions." Tyler Morrison knew he should say something, should apologize for his behavior, and acknowledge his mistakes. But the words wouldn't come. The magnitude of his misconceptions about Sarah, combined with the knowledge that she had helped save his grandfather's life, had left him speechless. Brad Stevens, the player with the injured shoulder who had been particularly cruel in his comments, was struggling with similar emotions. His family had a long tradition of military service. His own uncle had been killed in Iraq, and he was beginning to understand that his jokes about Sarah's uniform had been not just cruel, but deeply disrespectful to everything his family stood for. Coach Peterson, recognizing an opportunity to turn this moment into a teaching experience for his players, stepped forward again. "Sarah, you mentioned earlier that your team placed second in the state competition. I'd like to know, what did you learn from not coming in first?" The question was clearly designed to help his players understand something about resilience and learning from setbacks, challenges they faced every time they lost a game or failed to meet their goals. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "We learned that there's always room for improvement, no matter how well you think you've prepared. The team that beat us had been working together for 4 years, and their experience showed in the details of their presentation. It taught us that excellence isn't just about natural talent or individual effort. It's about sustained commitment over time." The lesson was not lost on the football players, many of whom had assumed that their athletic talents would automatically translate into success in other areas. Sarah was describing the kind of long-term dedication and continuous improvement that separated good teams from championship teams. But more than that, Sarah added, it taught us that the real competition isn't with other people, it's with yourself. The question isn't whether you're better than someone else, but whether you're better than you were yesterday. The wisdom in her words silenced even the adults in the crowd. Many of them had spent years focused on their children's competitive achievements, on beating other schools and other teams without stopping to consider whether they were actually helping their kids become better people. The stadium lights cast long shadows across the football field as the crowd began to process the full impact of what they had witnessed. Colonel Chen checked his watch and realized that his unexpected visit had already stretched longer than planned. The Black Hawk helicopter sat quietly on the 50-yard line, its crew patiently waiting for their distinguished passenger to conclude his mission. "Sarah," her father said, "I'm afraid I can't stay much longer. Duty calls, and I need to report back to my commanding officer about this little detour." The reminder that this magical moment would soon end hit Sarah like a cold wave. She had become so caught up in the wonder of her father's surprise appearance that she had almost forgotten he would have to leave again, returning to a war zone thousands of miles away, where every day brought new dangers and uncertainties. "How long do you have?" she asked, dreading the answer. "My leave lasts for 10 days, he replied, and Sarah's face lit up with joy. "I'll be staying at your Aunt Margaret's house in Springfield, and I'm hoping you might want to spend some time with me there. We have a lot to talk about regarding West Point and your future plans." The prospect of 10 whole days with her father felt like an impossible gift. Sarah had grown accustomed to measuring their contact in minutes stolen between his duties and the demands of combat operations. The idea of having actual conversations, of sharing meals together, of simply being in the same place at the same time, seemed almost too good to be true. Tyler Morrison finally found his courage and stepped forward, his teammates parting to let him through. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly as he approached the fence where Sarah stood with her father. "Excuse me, sir," he said to Colonel Chun, his voice formal and respectful in a way that surprised everyone who knew him. "I'm Tyler Morrison. I play quarterback for the team here." Colonel Chun studied the young man carefully, his experienced eyes taking in the expensive equipment, the confident posture that couldn't quite hide underlying uncertainty, and the genuine distress that was written across Tyler's features. "Nice to meet you, Tyler," he replied neutrally, waiting to see what the boy had to say. Tyler turned to Sarah, and the words came out in a rush, as if he was afraid he would lose his nerve if he waited any longer. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you a lot of apologies. I've been completely wrong about you, and I've said things and done things that were cruel and unfair." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah could see that admitting his mistakes was genuinely difficult for someone who was used to being admired and praised. "I found out tonight that you helped save my grandfather's life," Tyler continued, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "While I was making jokes about your uniform and treating you like you didn't matter, you were out there actually helping people and making a real difference." The confession sparked murmurs throughout the crowd as people began to understand the personal dimension of Tyler's change of heart. This wasn't just abstract recognition of Sarah's achievements. This was gratitude for a life saved. "I don't know if you can forgive me," Tyler said, "but I want you to know that I'm going to do better. I'm going to make sure my teammates do better too. What you've accomplished, the person you are, you deserve respect, and I should have seen that a long time ago." Sarah looked at Tyler for a long moment, seeing something in his eyes that she had never seen before, genuine humility and a recognition of his own failings. She thought about all the hurt he had caused her, all the times his casual cruelty had made her question her own worth. But she also thought about the values her father had taught her, the principles she had learned through her military training, and the kind of person she wanted to become. "Tyler," she said quietly, "I appreciate you saying that. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, especially in front of so many people." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I forgive you, but I hope you understand that forgiveness isn't just about feeling better. It's about changing how we treat each other going forward." Tyler nodded eagerly, relief flooding his features. "I understand, and I promise things will be different." Several other students began stepping forward, inspired by Tyler's example. Jessica approached with tears in her eyes, followed by Brad Stevens, who was struggling to find words for his own regrets. One by one, young people who had participated in or simply ignored the casual cruelty Sarah had endured began offering their own apologies. Colonel Chun watched this unexpected scene unfold with a mixture of pride in his daughter and satisfaction that his impromptu visit was having consequences far beyond what he had originally planned. He had simply wanted to honor Sarah's achievements and remind her that she was valued, but he was witnessing something even more important, a community beginning to examine its own values and behavior. Principal Martinez took advantage of the moment to make an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying over the crowd, "I think tonight has taught all of us some important lessons about recognizing excellence in all its forms. Effective immediately, I'm establishing a new recognition program to honor students who demonstrate exceptional character, service, and achievement, regardless of whether those accomplishments happen on the athletic field or in other areas." The announcement drew enthusiastic applause from the crowd, and Sarah felt a surge of hope that other students who felt different or overlooked might have an easier path than she had experienced. Dr. Williams, the superintendent, stepped forward to add his voice to the moment. "Furthermore, I'm committing to a comprehensive review of our district policies and culture to ensure that we're creating an environment where all students feel valued and supported in pursuing their goals." Coach Peterson nodded in agreement and turned to his team. "And starting Monday, we're going to begin incorporating some different ideas about leadership and character into our program. I think we can learn a lot from what Sarah and her fellow JROTC cadets have been doing." The football players were nodding in agreement, many of them looking at Sarah with newfound respect and curiosity about what she might be able to teach them. Colonel Chin smiled as he watched the ripple effects of his visit spread through the community. This was why he served, not for the medals or the recognition, but for moments like this when the values he fought to protect actually took root and made a difference in real people's lives. "Sarah," he said, "I need to wrap this up and get these pilots back to their base. But before I go, I want you to remember something important." He reached into his jacket pocket one final time and pulled out a small American flag, carefully folded in the traditional military style. "This flag flew over our forward operating base in Afghanistan for the past 6 months. It's been with me through some difficult times, and it's reminded me every day of what I'm fighting for and who I'm fighting for." He handed the flag to Sarah through the fence, and she accepted it with trembling hands, understanding the weight of what he was entrusting to her. "I want you to have it," he said, "because you've been fighting your own battles here at home, standing up for values that matter even when it was difficult and lonely. You've shown the same kind of courage that soldiers show in combat, just in a different way." Sarah clutched the flag to her chest, overwhelmed by the symbolism of the gesture and the trust her father was placing in her. "When you get to West Point," Colonel Shin continued, "you'll meet other cadets who come from all different backgrounds and experiences. Some will come from military families, others won't. Some will have faced challenges like yours, others will face different kinds of tests." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd one more time before focusing back on his daughter. "But I want you to remember that you're not going there as someone who needs to prove herself. You're going there as someone who has already proven herself, someone who understands what it means to serve with honor, even when no one is watching." The crowd had fallen completely silent again, recognizing that they were witnessing a father's final words to his daughter before returning to a war zone where every goodbye might be permanent. "I love you, sweetheart," Colonel Chin said simply. "I'm proud of you, and I can't wait to see what you accomplish next." Sarah reached through the fence to hug her father as best she could with the chain link between them, not caring that hundreds of people were watching this intimate moment. She held on as tightly as possible, trying to memorize the feeling of his arms around her, the scent of his uniform, the sound of his heartbeat. When they finally separated, both had tears in their eyes, but they were tears of joy and pride rather than sadness. Colonel Chun turned to address the crowd one final time. "Thank you all for welcoming me tonight and for listening to what I had to say about my daughter. I hope that Sarah's story can serve as a reminder that real strength often comes in forms we don't expect, and that the young people in your community are capable of more than you might imagine." He began walking back toward the helicopter, then paused and called back to the crowd. "Oh, and don't worry about the football game. I hear the Warriors have an excellent team this year, and I'm sure they'll make their community proud. The reminder about the football game sparked laughter and applause from the crowd, who had been so caught up in the evening's revelations that many had forgotten why they were there in the first place. As Colonel Chun climbed into the Black Hawk and the engines began spinning up, Sarah stood at the fence watching her father disappear once again into the machinery of military service. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't watching him leave. She was watching him return to his duty, having completed a mission that had changed everything. The helicopter lifted off smoothly, its powerful rotors stirring up dust and debris as it climbed into the starlit sky. The crowd watched until its navigation lights disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the memory of an extraordinary night that had transformed their understanding of one quiet girl in camouflage. As people began to disperse, heading back to their cars and their normal Friday night routines, Sarah remained at the fence, still clutching the folded flag her father had given her. She could feel the weight of the medal on her chest and the even greater weight of responsibility that came with being seen and understood for who she really was. Marcus Williams approached her as the crowd thinned out. "Sarah," he said, "I just wanted you to know that what happened tonight, what your father said about you, it didn't surprise me. I always knew there was something special about you." Sarah smiled at him, grateful for his consistent kindness throughout everything she had endured. "Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know." Tyler Morrison lingered nearby, still processing everything that had happened and trying to find a way to rebuild the relationship he had damaged through months of thoughtless behavior. "Sarah," he called out hesitantly, "I know I have a lot of work to do to earn your trust back, but I was wondering, would you consider helping our team with that leadership training Coach Peterson mentioned? I think we could really benefit from learning about the kind of character you've developed." The request represented a complete reversal of their social dynamic, with the star quarterback asking for help from the girl he had been mocking just hours earlier. Sarah considered his request carefully, thinking about the values her father had taught her and the person she wanted to become. "I'd be willing to help," she said finally, "but not just with the football team. If we're going to do this, it should be open to any student who wants to participate. Leadership isn't just for athletes." Tyler nodded enthusiastically, understanding that Sarah was offering him a chance at redemption while also staying true to her principles of inclusion and fairness. As the last of the crowd dispersed and the stadium lights began to dim, Sarah Chin walked slowly back toward the school building, her uniform perfect despite everything that had happened, her head held high with the quiet confidence that comes from being truly seen and valued for who you are. The girl in camouflage was no longer an outsider looking in. She was exactly where she belonged, ready to continue serving her community and her country with the same dignity and character that had earned her a place at the most prestigious military academy in America. And somewhere in the darkness above, a Black Hawk helicopter carried a proud father back to his war, secure in the knowledge that his daughter would be fine without him. Not because she didn't need him, but because she had learned to be exactly who she was meant to be.